Ambassador Sarah Chun walked through the crystal corridors of Nexus Prime, her footsteps echoing against the walls that hummed with ancient power. The capital world of the Galactic Consortium was a marvel that still took her breath away, even after 5 years of service here. Towers of living crystal stretched toward the purple sky, and beings from 100 different worlds moved through the air on platforms of pure energy. Sarah adjusted her formal diplomatic robes, the heavy fabric a constant reminder of how hard humanity had worked to earn their place here. The robes were designed by the Consortium's Cultural Committee to make humans appear less threatening. The soft blues and greens were meant to project peace and harmony, while the loose fit hid the muscular build that marked humans as descendants of predators. She entered the council chamber, where representatives from the elder races had already gathered. The Voldari floated in their energy forms, looking like living starlight wrapped in flowing robes. Their spokesperson, Ambassador Quithnos, regarded Sarah with what she had learned to recognize as polite disdain. The crystalline Zephyrites hummed in harmonious tones that hurt human ears, while the gaseous nebulans swirled in their containment suits like captured storms. "Ah, the young ones arrive," Quethnos said, his voice like wind through crystal chimes. "Tell me, Ambassador Chun, how does your species progress in the art of true civilization?" Sarah smiled, though the words stung. Humanity had been part of the Consortium for 197 years. But the beings who measured time in millennia, they were still children playing at adulthood. "We continue to learn from our betters," she replied, using the formal response drilled into every human diplomat. Earth's colonies report steady progress in adopting Consortium standards. The truth was more complex. Humanity had given up much to join this alliance. They had suppressed their competitive sports, their martial arts, their war stories. Children learned sanitized histories that painted their ancestors as primitive, but well-meaning creatures who had finally evolved beyond violence. The old military academies had become cultural centers. Museums displayed weapons as curiosities from a barbaric past. In return, humanity gained access to technology that had advanced them by centuries. Faster than light travel, medical advances that extended human life to 300 years, and agricultural techniques that had ended hunger. Most humans believed it was a fair trade. Sarah took her place at the lowest tier of the chamber. The seating arrangement reflected status in the galactic community. The Voldari occupied the highest positions, having founded the Consortium 10,000 years ago. Below them sat the Zephyrites, who had joined 8,000 years past, then the Nebulans at 6,000 years. Dozens of other species filled the middle tiers based on their length of membership and cultural achievements. Humans sat at the bottom with only 3 other species, all recent additions to the galactic community. "We have received the quarterly reports from all member worlds," announced the Zephyrite speaker, its crystalline body chiming with each word. "Most colonies show acceptable progress in maintaining galactic peace. However, there are concerning reports from the Outer Rim territories." Sarah straightened. Earth maintained 17 colonies in the Outer Rim, frontier worlds where human settlers worked to establish new homes far from the core systems. These colonies were humanity's pride, showing that even newcomers could contribute to galactic expansion. "The colony designated New Terra in Sector 7 has failed to submit its routine reports," continued the speaker. "Additionally, our deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual energy signatures from that region." Sarah's blood chilled. New Terra was one of humanity's largest colonies, home to over 3 million people. The terraforming project had been a model of human innovation, turning a harsh world into a garden paradise. Her own nephew lived there with his family. She activated her console and spoke carefully. "Honored speaker, humanity requests permission to investigate this matter. New Terra houses many of our people, and we are concerned for their safety." The chamber fell silent except for the musical humming of the Zephyrites. Ambassador Quethnos turned his attention to Sarah, and she felt the weight of his ancient mind examining her thoughts. "Young ambassador," he said with what might have been amusement, "your species' tendency toward anxiety is well documented. Energy signatures in deep space occur for countless reasons. Solar flares, asteroid impacts, equipment malfunctions. There is no cause for the alarm that colors your thoughts." Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. "With respect, honored ones, our people live on that world. Even if the danger is minimal, should we not investigate to ensure their safety?" "The consortium maintains monitoring stations throughout the galaxy," replied the Zephyrite speaker. "If there were genuine threats to any member world, appropriate action would be taken. Your colony has likely experienced minor communication difficulties. Nothing more." The Nebulan representative, a swirling mass of pink and gold gases, added in a voice like rushing wind, "Perhaps this is an opportunity for the young species to practice the patience that marks true civilization. Not every silence requires investigation. Not every mystery demands solving." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists beneath the table and forced them to relax. The diplomatic training was clear. Humans must never show aggression or challenge the wisdom of the elder races. Their acceptance into the consortium was still probationary, subject to review every 50 years. "Of course," she said, bowing her head in submission. "We shall await the wisdom of the monitoring stations." But even as she spoke the words, a cold fear settled in her chest. New Terra had never missed a communication window in 30 years of operation. The colony maintained 3 separate communication arrays precisely to prevent such failures. Something was wrong, and the consortium's casual dismissal felt like willful ignorance. The session continued with routine matters of trade and cultural exchange. Sarah participated automatically, her mind focused on New Terra. When the meeting finally ended, she returned to her quarters in the human embassy section of Nexus Prime. The embassy was smaller than those of other species, reflecting humanity's junior status. But it was home to 200 humans who worked tirelessly to prove their species worthy of galactic citizenship. They studied alien cultures, translated human achievements into forms the elder races could appreciate, and carefully monitored their own behavior. To avoid giving offense, Sarah activated her personal communication system and sent an encrypted message to Earth. The consortium allowed such communications but monitored them carefully. She had to be cautious. "Personal message to Director Williams," she began. "Family concerns require attention. Nephew's letters have stopped arriving. Please check on extended family welfare through unofficial channels." It was a code they had developed for sensitive situations. Director Williams would understand that she was asking for an investigation into New Terra using Earth's own resources, not consortium channels. As she waited for a response, Sarah stood before the window looking out at the impossible beauty of Nexus Prime. Ships from 1,000 worlds docked at stations that hung in the air like jewels. The elder races had built something magnificent here, a civilization that had lasted longer than human history. But for the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime, Sarah wondered if that beauty came at a price that her species was only beginning to understand. Dr. Marcus Webb stared at the view screen of the research vessel Endeavor as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Terra system. What he saw made his stomach turn to ice. The planet still hung in space like a blue and green jewel, but something was terribly wrong. No ships moved between the orbital stations. No lights twinkled from the space elevators that connected the surface to the ring of satellites above. The entire system was silent. "Doctor," called Lieutenant Hayes from the communication station. "I'm not reading any active signals from New Terra. The automated beacons are still broadcasting, but there's no response to our hails." Webb rubbed his tired eyes. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, traveling through back routes to avoid Consortium monitoring. Earth's government had given him unofficial permission to investigate after Ambassador Chen's coded message. But if the Consortium discovered this unauthorized expedition, it could mean humanity's expulsion from the Galactic Alliance. "Take us in slowly," Webb ordered Captain Morrison. "Full sensor sweeps. I want to know what happened here before we set foot on the surface." The Endeavour was a science vessel, not a warship. Its crew of 50 included doctors, biologists, and engineers, all volunteers who had family or friends on New Terra. They had come expecting to find communication problems, or maybe damage from an asteroid impact. None of them were prepared for what they discovered. As they approached the planet, the sensors revealed the truth piece by piece. The orbital stations were intact but empty. The space elevators hung motionless in the vacuum. The surface city showed no signs of movement, though the buildings appeared undamaged from orbit. Dr. Webb called Dr. Sarah Kim from the biology station. "I'm detecting something strange in the atmospheric readings. There are chemical compounds in the air that don't match New Terra's normal composition." Webb moved to her station and studied the data. His expertise in alien biology had earned him a place on this mission, but what he saw made no sense. These compounds, they're not naturally occurring. Someone released something into the atmosphere. "Biological agents?" asked Captain Morrison, moving closer. "Maybe, but nothing in our databases matches this chemical signature. We need to go down there and see for ourselves." The landing party consisted of 6 people in full environmental suits. They chose the main settlement of Hope's Landing, where over 500,000 colonists had lived. From space, it looked normal. Streets laid out in neat patterns, buildings intact, vehicles parked in orderly rows. The shuttle touched down in the central plaza, where a fountain still sprayed water into the air. Everything looked peaceful, like the colonists had simply stepped away for a moment. But when they left the shuttle, they found the first bodies. A family sat on a bench near the fountain. A man, woman, and 2 children, frozen in their final moments. Their faces showed terrible pain, mouths open in silent screams, hands clawed as if trying to tear something from their skin. But their bodies showed no wounds, no signs of violence. "My God," whispered Dr. Kim through her suit's radio. "What could do this?" They moved through the city like explorers in a tomb. Every building contained more bodies. Families dead in their homes. Workers collapsed at their stations. Children who had died while playing in parks. All showed the same signs of excruciating death, but no visible injuries. In the medical center, they found Dr. Elena Santos, the colony's chief physician, slumped over her desk. But unlike the others, she had managed to activate a recording device before dying. Her voice was weak and filled with pain as she spoke to the camera. Day 12 of the outbreak. The pathogen is unlike anything we've seen. It attacks the nervous system, causing intense pain before shutting down basic functions. We've tried everything, but nothing stops it. She coughed, and blood spattered across her desk. The children are dying first. They scream for hours before it ends. I've sealed the medical files in the computer core. Maybe someone will find them. Maybe they'll understand what was done to us. The recording ended with Dr. Santos collapsing, her hand reaching toward the camera. Webb and his team worked for hours, gathering samples and data. The computer records revealed the timeline of the disaster. The pathogen had appeared suddenly, spreading through the population in waves. It was clearly artificial, designed to cause maximum suffering while leaving infrastructure intact. But the most chilling discovery came from the colony's security records. 3 days before the outbreak began, ships had been detected at the edge of the system. The sensor logs showed vessels using Voldari technology, though they carried no identification markers. Dr. Webb called Lieutenant Hayes from the communication station they had set up in the colony's command center. "I'm picking up incoming ships. Multiple vessels heading this way fast." Webb looked at the scanner display. A fleet of consortium vessels was approaching, led by a massive Valdari command ship. They would arrive in less than 2 hours. "Pack everything," Webb ordered. "We need to leave now." But even as they prepared to evacuate, more ships appeared on the sensors. This time, they were consortium peacekeepers, moving to surround the planet. The Endeavour was trapped. Captain Morrison made the difficult decision to hide their shuttle in the ruins of the spaceport, while the main ship tried to slip away using the planet's gravity well. But the consortium ships were too fast and too many. When the Valdari command vessel hailed them, Webb had no choice but to respond. Ambassador Quethnos appeared on the screen, his energy form crackling with displeasure. "Dr. Webb, your presence here violates multiple consortium treaties. You will surrender your vessel and submit to detention." "We came to investigate the fate of our people," Webb replied. 3 million human colonists are dead, and we have evidence of deliberate biological warfare. The new Terra incident has been classified under galactic security protocols, Quethnos said coldly. "All evidence must be surrendered to consortium authorities for proper analysis." Webb felt anger burning in his chest, an emotion he had been trained to suppress in dealings with the elder races. But looking at the data they had gathered, at the proof of deliberate genocide, he found it hard to stay calm. "These people were murdered," he said. "Their children died in agony. You cannot simply classify this away." "Young species often see malice where none exists," Quethnos replied. "The investigation will be conducted by qualified personnel. Your crude analysis would only contaminate the evidence." The consortium ships surrounded the Endeavour, and boarding parties prepared to transfer over. Webb made one last transmission to Earth, sending everything they had discovered in a compressed data burst that he prayed would reach home before the consortium could stop it. As Valdari security forces took control of his ship, Webb watched the planet below through the view screen. New Terra looked peaceful from space, beautiful and serene. No one would ever know that 3 million people had died there in unimaginable pain, or that their killers now claimed the authority to investigate their own crime. The consortium took everything. All the biological samples, all the computer records, all the evidence that might prove what had really happened. The official report would blame environmental catastrophe or disease, anything except deliberate murder. But they could not take the memory of what Webb had seen. The bodies of children who had died screaming. The recorded words of a doctor who had watched her world die. The sensor logs that showed Valdari ships in the system when the killing began. As the Endeavour was escorted away from New Terra under guard. Webb wondered if this was how civilizations really died. Not in glorious battles or dramatic last stands, but in quiet murders covered up by official reports and classified investigations. The galaxy's elder races had maintained their power for thousands of years by controlling information as carefully as they controlled technology. They decided what truth looked like, and younger species had no choice but to accept their version of events. But this time, they had made a mistake. Some of the evidence had already reached Earth, carried by the data burst Webb had transmitted. Humanity would know what had happened to New Terra, even if they could never prove it to the galaxy. The question was, what would they do with that knowledge? President Elena Vasquez stood before the global parliament as representatives from every nation on Earth watched in tense silence. The Great Chamber had been built to celebrate humanity's entry into the galactic community, its walls decorated with symbols of peace and cooperation. Today, those symbols felt like mockery. "Fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber and to billions watching around the world. 3 weeks ago, we lost contact with our colony on New Terra. Yesterday, Dr. Marcus Webb returned with the truth of what happened there. She activated the holographic display behind her, showing images that made several representatives gasp in horror. Bodies of colonists frozen in their final agony. Empty cities where children's toys lay scattered in playgrounds that would never again hear laughter. Medical records documenting the systematic extinction of 3.2 million human beings. This was not natural disaster, Vasquez continued. This was not disease or accident. Our people were murdered using biological weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering while leaving infrastructure intact. Every man, woman, and child on New Terra died in agony. Representative Johnson from the North American Federation raised his hand. Madam President, the consortium's official report blamed environmental catastrophe. Are you saying they're wrong? Vasquez felt her jaw tighten. I'm saying they're lying. Dr. Webb's team detected Valdari ships in the New Terra system 3 days before the pathogen was released. When he tried to gather evidence, consortium forces seized everything and classified the investigation under Galactic Security protocols. She changed the display to show intercepted communications that Earth's intelligence services had decoded. The messages were fragmentary, but their meaning was clear enough. These transmissions discuss something called the Genetic Refinement Program, Vasquez said. For the past 50 years, extremist factions within the Valdari Empire have been systematically eliminating species they consider genetically inferior. The consortium leadership has not only known about this program, they've actively protected it. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives demanded to know why this information had been hidden, why Earth's government had not acted sooner. But Vasquez held up her hand for silence. We kept this quiet because we hoped to work within the system, she said. We believed that reasonable beings could be convinced by evidence and appeals to justice. Ambassador Chun has spent months presenting our case to the Consortium Council. The holographic display showed Chun's formal presentation to the Galactic Assembly. Her careful words, her respectful tone, her desperate plea for justice. Then it showed the response. Dismissal, mockery, and threats of expulsion from the consortium if humanity continued to spread divisive conspiracy theories. The final insult came 3 days ago, Vasquez continued. Valdari Ambassador Quethenos publicly stated that perhaps the primitives have learned the cost of reaching beyond their station. He called the death of our children a lesson in humility. The anger in the chamber was palpable now. These were people whose families lived on distant colonies, who had sacrificed to build humanity's place among the stars. They had sent their children to worlds like New Terra, trusting that the galaxy's elder races would protect them as promised. Dr. Webb stood to address the assembly, his face gaunt from weeks of investigation and interrogation by consortium authorities. New Terra was chosen specifically because our colonists had adapted to their world in ways that challenged Valdari genetic theories, he said. The harsh environment triggered evolutionary changes that made them stronger, more resilient. They were proving that younger species could surpass their elders given time and opportunity. He activated his own display, showing genetic analysis of the New Terra colonists compared to baseline humans. The differences were subtle but significant. Enhanced lung capacity, improved bone density, resistance to radiation that would have impressed even the Valdari. They killed our people because they were becoming too successful, Webb concluded. The genetic refinement program isn't about maintaining peace or stability. It's about ensuring that the elder races never face competition from species they consider inferior. Representative Martinez from the South American Union stood up, her voice shaking with rage. Then, why are we still pretending to be civilized? Why are we following their rules when they murder our children? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For 2 centuries, humanity had suppressed its aggressive instincts to meet consortium standards of civilization. They had turned warriors into diplomats, soldiers into scientists, conquest into cooperation. Vasquez looked around the chamber at faces filled with grief and fury. She thought of her own granddaughter, who lived on the colony world of Kepler 442b. How long before that world was deemed too successful, too threatening to elder race supremacy? Because we believed their lies, she said finally. We thought civilization meant weakness wearing the mask of virtue. We let them convince us that our nature was something to be ashamed of, something to overcome. She walked to the center of the chamber, her voice rising with each word. But our ancestors didn't crawl out of caves and build starships by being civilized. They did it by refusing to accept defeat, by fighting when they had to fight, by being willing to do terrible things to terrible people when all other options failed. The chamber was completely silent now. Vasquez could feel the weight of history in this moment, the point where everything would change. The Vaulteri want to know what happens when primitives reach beyond their station. She continued, "The consortium wants to teach us the cost of challenging our betters? Fine. Let's show them what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be something we're not." She activated the final display, showing Earth's hidden military preparations. For months, while diplomats spoke of peace and cooperation, human engineers had been reverse engineering consortium technology. Ship designs that no one had suspected. Weapons that violated every treaty humanity had signed. "For 2 centuries, we've played by their rules," Vasquez said. "We've spoken their language of civility. We've suppressed what we are to become what they demanded. Our children are dead. And they call it environmental catastrophe." She looked directly into the cameras that would carry her words to every human world in the galaxy. "We're done being civilized." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in 200 years, every nation on Earth spoke with one voice. The age of human submission to galactic authority was over. Within hours, encrypted messages flashed across space to every human colony. The signals were hidden in routine communications, disguised as commercial data, embedded in entertainment broadcasts. But their meaning was clear to those who knew how to read them. The mask was coming off. Humanity was remembering what they had been before they tried to become what others wanted them to be. On Kepler 442b, miners stopped sending tribute shipments to consortium tax collectors. On New Geneva, scientists began working on projects that violated peaceful research protocols. On distant frontier worlds, colonists who had lived as farmers and merchants began practicing skills their grandparents had hoped they would never need. The transformation had begun. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity would become when they stopped trying to be good guests and started being themselves again. Ambassador Chun, still on Nexus Prime, watched the Global Parliament session from her quarters and felt a chill run down her spine. She had worked so hard to build bridges between humanity and the elder races. Now those bridges were burning, and she wasn't sure what would rise from the ashes. But when she thought of the children who had died screaming on New Terra, she found it hard to mourn for the civilization that had allowed such horrors to continue. Some things were more important than peace. Some prices were too high to pay for acceptance. The galaxy's elder races had forgotten something important about the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. Humans were not just capable of violence. They were very, very good at it. And they were about to remember why their ancestors had been the apex predators on their world. Admiral Rachel Torres had been Captain Rachel Torres just 6 months ago, commander of a peaceful exploration vessel mapping uncharted systems for the consortium's stellar cartography project. She had never fired a shot in anger, never commanded a warship, never even raised her voice to another sentient being. That changed the day the Zephyrite tax collectors arrived at Kepler 442b. demanding tribute from a human mining colony. Torres stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the dreadnought Retribution, watching as Consortium enforcement ships approached the asteroid field where the miners had disappeared. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency around her, most of them former scientists and explorers who had learned new skills in the months since Earth declared its independence from galactic civilization. "Admiral," reported her tactical officer. "Commander Park, the Zephyrite squadron is holding position at the edge of the field. They're demanding the return of mining equipment and payment of overdue taxes." Torres smiled, though it was not a pleasant expression. "Tell them they're welcome to come collect their tribute in person." The Consortium had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human psychology. They had assumed that because humans could be civilized, they had lost the ability to be anything else. 2 centuries of peaceful cooperation had convinced the elder races that humanity's predatory nature had been successfully suppressed. They were about to learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. "Squadron Leader Vortech is transmitting," reported the communications officer. "He says the humans have 1 hour to surrender or face the consequences of defying Consortium authority." Torres activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the Admiral. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten human families. Remember New Terra. Remember our children who died screaming, while these creatures debated whether their suffering was worth investigating." The Retribution and her escort ships moved deeper into the asteroid field, their hulls dark and silent. The Consortium ships followed, confident in their technological superiority and ancient authority they had never faced. Humans who fought like humans. The first Zephyrite vessel died when it passed too close to what appeared to be a drifting rock. The asteroid cracked open, revealing a hidden weapons platform that unleashed a barrage of kinetic projectiles at point-blank range. Crystal armor designed to deflect energy weapons, shattered like glass under the impact of simple metal slugs fired at relativistic speeds. The second ship fell victim to an ancient human tactic, the ambush. Mining charges, repurposed as weapons, had been placed throughout the asteroid field. As the Consortium ships maneuvered through what they thought was empty space, explosions erupted around them with carefully calculated timing. "Impossible," transmitted Squadron Leader Vortech as his remaining ships tried to retreat. "These tactics are barbaric. They violate every principle of civilized warfare." Torres opened a channel to the Consortium forces. "Civilized warfare?" she said, her voice cold as space itself. "Is that what you called the biological weapons used on New Terra? Was it civilized when you murdered 3 million children?" The third Zephyrite ship died when the Retribution herself emerged from the shadow of a large asteroid, moving at attack speed with all weapons powered. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it was over, only one Consortium vessel remained functional. "You will tell your superiors what happened here today," Torres transmitted to the surviving ship. "Tell them that humanity is no longer interested in their version of civilization. Tell them that we remember what we were before we tried to become what they wanted." The lone Zephyrite vessel limped away, carrying news of defeat that would shock the Consortium to its ancient foundations. But the Battle of Kepler 442b was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, human colonies that had lived peacefully under Consortium rule for generations began to change. The transformation was subtle at first, but it spread like wildfire through the human diaspora. On New Geneva, Dr. Sarah Kim finished her analysis of the biological weapon used on New Terra. Her team had worked for months to understand its structure, and they had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. More importantly, they had developed countermeasures that would make such attacks impossible in the future. But Kim had gone further than mere defense. In the deep laboratories beneath New Geneva's surface, her team had created weapons of their own. Not biological agents designed to cause suffering, but precise tools that could shut down the neural systems of specific alien species without affecting humans or their allies. The irony is perfect, Kim told her assistant as they sealed the final batch of synthesis. They used our biology against us. Now we'll use theirs against them. On the frontier world of Harmony, former Ambassador David Cross supervised the construction of ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Human engineering had always been practical rather than elegant, focused on function over form. The elder races built their vessels like works of art. Beautiful and impressive human warships looked like what they were. Instruments of destruction built by a species that understood violence at a fundamental level. The new ships were smaller than traditional consortium vessels, but they carried devastating firepower and could move faster than anything in space. More importantly, they were designed to be expendable. Humans had learned the lesson that sometimes the best way to win a war was to be willing to lose more ships than your enemy could afford to destroy. But the most significant change was happening in the minds of humanity itself. Children who had been taught sanitized histories began learning the real story of their species. They studied the wars that had forged human civilization, the strategies that had allowed their ancestors to survive in a hostile universe. Military academies reopened on Earth for the first time in 2 centuries. Young people who had planned careers in diplomacy or science signed up to learn the arts of war. They studied Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, Patton and Alexander, learning from humanity's greatest military minds. The consortium's intelligence services began to pick up fragmentary reports of these changes, but their analysts dismissed most of them as impossible. Humans have been peaceful for too long, they reasoned. They lacked the cultural memory necessary for effective warfare. The error in that reasoning became apparent when human fleets began appearing in systems throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors but as liberators. Species that had suffered under consortium oppression for millennia suddenly found themselves with powerful allies who didn't demand tribute or cultural subjugation. The Altarians, who had been enslaved for 3,000 years, welcomed human soldiers who fought to free their homeworld. The Keepers, whose crystal cities had been stripped for consortium construction projects, found human engineers willing to help them rebuild. Each victory brought new allies, and each ally brought new knowledge of consortium weaknesses. Humanity learned that the galaxy's elder races had maintained their power not through military might, but through careful control of information and resources. They also learned that many younger species had been waiting for someone strong enough to challenge that control. The first major confrontation came at Proxima Station, a massive consortium military base that controlled access to the core systems. Admiral Torres led a combined fleet of human ships and allied vessels against what should have been an impregnable fortress. The station's defenders expected a traditional assault, waves of attacking ships against fixed fortifications, the kind of battle that had been fought for thousands of years. Instead, they faced something entirely different. Human fighters, too small for the station's weapons to target effectively, delivered nuclear mines directly to the station's hull. The mines were crude by consortium standards, but their explosive power was devastating. More importantly, they were delivered by pilots who had volunteered for one-way missions, willing to die to ensure their weapons reached their targets. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. The consortium had forgotten that humans were capable of sacrifice for causes larger than themselves. When Proxima Station fell, its destruction visible from a dozen nearby systems, the galaxy understood that something fundamental had changed. The age of elder race supremacy was ending. age of elder race supremacy was ending, and something new and terrible was taking its place. Admiral Torres stood in the ruins of the station's command center, looking out at the wreckage of what had been considered an invincible fortress. Around her, human soldiers worked alongside alien allies to secure the facility and free thousands of imprisoned dissidents. "What now, Admiral?" asked Commander Park. "Where do we strike next?" Torres smiled, and for the first time in months, it was not a cold expression. "Now we do what humans have always done best," she said. "We show the galaxy that no tyranny is permanent, and that even the oldest empires can fall when they face people who refuse to surrender." The liberation of the galaxy had begun, and humanity was just getting started. 2 years after the massacre at New Terra, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in what had once been the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Consortium. The crystal walls were cracked. The energy platforms that had carried the elder races lay broken on the floor, and weeds grew through the gaps in the ancient stone. But she was no longer Ambassador Chun. The Free Worlds Coalition had elected her as their first Secretary General, a position that carried far more real power than any human had ever held in the old system. The irony was not lost on her. She had spent years trying to earn humanity a voice in galactic affairs through careful diplomacy and cultural submission. Now, with the consortium destroyed and the elder races scattered, she had more influence than any human leader in history. The transformation had been swift and brutal. The Valdari Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, had fractured into dozens of competing factions within 6 months of humanity's rebellion. The moderate Valdari sought peace treaties and amnesty agreements, while the extremist Kethmori holdouts faced war crimes, tribunals for genocide. The Zephyrites had retreated to their homeworld and sealed themselves behind energy barriers, refusing all contact with the outside galaxy. The Nebulans had simply dissolved their government, breaking apart into individual city-states that traded with anyone who would accept their exotic technologies. But the most profound change was not in the former ruling species. It was in the hundreds of younger races that had lived under consortium oppression for centuries or millennia. Worlds that had sent tribute to the elder races for generations suddenly found themselves free to chart their own destinies. The results were chaotic but exhilarating. "Secretary General," said Admiral Torres, entering the ruined chamber where Chun had been standing in contemplation. "The Altarian delegation has arrived for the Constitutional Convention. They're bringing representatives from 47 liberated worlds." Chun nodded, turning away from the window that looked out over Nexus Prime's dying cityscape. The capital world of the former consortium was mostly empty now. The great crystal towers still reached toward the sky, but they no longer hummed with power. The energy platforms that had carried citizens between levels lay motionless. "Any word from the holdout systems?" Chun asked. Torres frowned. 3 more Kethmori strongholds fell to Allied forces last week. "The war crimes evidence we recovered is—" She paused, searching for words. "It's worse than we thought. New Terra wasn't an isolated incident. They've been systematically exterminating younger species for centuries." Chun felt a familiar knot of anger in her stomach. The full scope of the genetic refinement program had taken months to uncover. Entire species erased from existence. Worlds sterilized to prevent genetic contamination. Children murdered simply for being born to the wrong parents. "How many?" Chun asked quietly. "Current estimates suggest over 2 billion sentient beings across 17 species in the past century alone," Torres replied. "Dr. Webb's team thinks the program may have been active for much longer, but the earlier records were better hidden." 2 billion. The number was too large to really comprehend, but Chun tried anyway. She thought of the children on New Terra who had died screaming, multiplied across dozens of worlds and hundreds of years. The Kathmori leadership will face trial, she said finally. Every single one of them. No amnesty, no exile, no comfortable retirement. They'll answer for every murdered child. Torres nodded grimly. The war crimes tribunals had become a cornerstone of the new galactic order. Justice delayed was still justice, and the survivors of extinct species deserved to see their killers face consequences. But even as they planned tribunals for the worst war criminals in galactic history, Chun worried about what humanity itself was becoming. The species that had once prided itself on peaceful cooperation had unleashed a capacity for violence that shocked even their allies thought human forces had liberated dozens of worlds. But their methods were increasingly ruthless. Prisoners were rare when humans attacked consortium strongholds. Quarter was seldom given to those who had participated in genocide. The Geneva Conventions, once humanity's proud contribution to galactic law, seemed like ancient history. Admiral, Chun said carefully, I've been reviewing reports from the vegan system liberation. The human forces there executed 200 Valdari administrators without trial. Torres's expression hardened. Those administrators were running slave labor camps. They had detailed records of torture programs designed to break the spirits of captured dissidents. My soldiers found children who had been used for medical experiments. I understand the anger, Chun said, but we can't become the monsters we're fighting. If we abandon the principles that made us better than them, what's the point of victory? The point, Torres replied sharply, is that genocide stops. The point is that no more worlds die like New Terra. Sometimes being good means doing terrible things to terrible people. It was an argument that raged throughout human space. Military commanders like Torres argued that the elder races had forfeited their right to civilization when they chose genocide. Diplomatic leaders, like Chun, worried that humanity was losing its soul in pursuit of justice. The truth was probably somewhere in between. But Chun feared they wouldn't recognize the line until they had already crossed it. A messenger entered the chamber, bowing respectfully to both women. Secretary General, the Constitutional Convention is ready to begin. The delegates are waiting for your opening address. Chun took a deep breath and followed the messenger toward the makeshift assembly hall that had been set up in the ruins of the old Consortium Parliament. Representatives from over 100 worlds had come to Nexus Prime to help design a new form of galactic government. Unlike the old Consortium, where elder races held permanent seats of power, the new system would be based on equality and mutual consent. No species would rule over others. No ancient claims of superiority would be recognized. Every world would have a voice, from the oldest civilizations to the newest spacefaring cultures. It was a noble ideal. But Chun wondered if it could survive the realities of governing a galaxy where old hatreds ran deep and new. Conflicts emerged daily. As she walked through corridors that had once echoed with the voices of beings who considered themselves gods, Chun reflected on the price of the transformation they had wrought. The galaxy was freer than it had been in millennia, but it was also more violent, more chaotic, more uncertain. The membrane between civilization and barbarism had proven thinner than anyone imagined. When pushed beyond endurance, even the most peaceful species could become something their ancestors would not recognize. The assembly hall buzzed with conversation in hundreds of languages as delegates from across the galaxy debated the future of their worlds. Chun took her place at the podium, looking out at faces that represented the dreams and fears of trillions of sentient beings. Fellow sapiens, she began. Her words translated simultaneously into every language present. 2 years ago, the galaxy seemed stable. The Consortium had maintained peace for 10,000 years. The elder races ruled with the wisdom of ages. The future appeared predictable. She paused, letting the weight of recent history settle over the assembly. We learned that stability built on oppression is not peace. We discovered that wisdom can become arrogance, and age can become blindness to justice. We found that even the most ancient tyrannies can fall when ordinary people refuse to accept that suffering is the natural order of things. The hall was completely silent. Now, today we begin the work of building something better. Not perfect, not eternal, but better. A galaxy where children don't die for the accident of their birth. A civilization where justice matters more than ancestry. A future where strength serves others rather than dominating them. Chun looked up at the broken ceiling of the ancient chamber, where stars were visible through cracks in the crystal dome. We cannot bring back those who died in the darkness of the old order, but we can ensure that their deaths were not meaningless. We can build a galaxy worthy of their sacrifice. As the delegates began their work, Chun wondered if humanity would find its way back to the ideals that had made civilization worth preserving. The galaxy's greatest predators had been unleashed, and now they had to learn to be human again. Outside the assembly hall, construction crews worked to repair the damaged infrastructure of Nexus Prime. The great crystal towers would hum with power again, but they would serve a different purpose now. Instead of reinforcing ancient hierarchies, they would connect free worlds in voluntary association. The new galactic civilization would be humanity's greatest test. They had proven they could destroy tyranny. Now they had to prove they could build something better to replace it. In a memorial garden built on the ruins of the Valdari embassy, a simple stone bore the names of every person who had died on New Terra. Beneath their names, carved in letters that caught the light of Nexus Prime's dying sun, were words that had become the motto of the new age. Civilization is not weakness wearing a mask of virtue. True civilization is strength that chooses mercy, but never forgets how to be strong. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers, but their refusal to accept that any defeat was permanent.